All right, boys and girls, so today we're going to be going over lesson 2, which is parallel and perpendicular lines. Please try to contain your excitement. I know that we love talking about our parallel and perpendicular lines, so just try to stick with me. I know yesterday we had gone over how to find slope, what the y-intercept is, you know, what all of those things represent. We're just going to build on that today, all right? As I'm going through the lesson, just like always, if you need a minute to pause the video, to take any notes, or to ask yourself if you really understood, you know, what was going on, please do that. So just as a reminder, you can always pause the video as we go through. Okay, as I look at the do now, it says solve the following system of equations graphically. So this keyword tells me that I have to graph in order to answer the question. I can't solve, I can't just type it in my calculator and look at the answer. I have to actually graph them on the side here. So as we went over yesterday, I know that the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. So I'm just going to add that to the top here. As I look at the first equation, I can see that it's in the form of y equals mx plus b. So I can start solving and just go from there. If you are having trouble with solving, graphing, I know that you normally have the calculator at school that can do it for you. If you can, there's a free app. It's called the Calculator X. So if you want to download that, it allows you to graph and it allows you to look at the table for the XY values, just like you could do at school. So if you have the luxury of, you know, a cell phone or, you know, an iPad, a tablet, anything like that, I suggest you download that app just for graphing the lines if you're still having trouble with that. Okay, I know yesterday we did go over how to graph without a calculator. I'm going to start with my y-intercept, that b value, which is positive 8. So again, on my y-axis, I'm going to plot the point positive 8. Then I'm going to go back to the slope. I know that slope is rise over run. And I know that every number is over 1, so I'm going to just add that on. So this tells me that I'm going to rise 3. Rise is always going up. And then when I run, I can either run to the left or to the right. So since this is negative, I'm going to run to the left one time. So if I try to rise 3 and run to the left one time, I'm going off the graph. But that's okay, because instead of going up and to the left, I'm just going to go down and to the right instead. So instead of going up 3, left 1, I'm going down 3, right 1. And I'm going to do it again. Down 3, right 1, down 3, right 1. I'm going to do this about 4 or 5 times just so I can get a good idea of where my line is going to be. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to connect all of my points as best as I can, including arrows at the end because I know a line goes on forever. And now I'm done with the first equation. So I'm going to just take a minute because I know I'm graphing 2 equations and I want to be able to tell, you know, which is which. So I'm just going to highlight that first equation that I graphed here in yellow. And then again, I'm going to highlight the function in yellow. Now I'm going to look at number 2. This is not in y equal. It's y plus 2 equals form. So I have to get rid of that positive 2. So I'm just going to make it a negative 2. So that way I can move it over. So now I have the equation y equals 1/3 x minus 2. And now I'm good to go. So again, I can see that my y-intercept, my b value is negative 2. So on my y-axis, I'm going to plot negative 2. And then again, I'm going to rise 1, and I'm going to run 3 to the right because this is a positive slope. So up 1 to the right 3. Up 1 over 3, up 1 over 3. And I can do the opposite. Instead, I can go down 1 and to the left 3. Down 1 over 3, just to continue plotting more points. And now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to connect all those points with a straight line. Make sure I have arrows at the end. And since this is a second line, a different one, I'm just going to highlight it in a different color. So I also have green with me. So I'm just going to highlight this line in green. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and just highlight the equation in green as well. All right. you can always go back and actually label each line because that's something we should really be doing. So the first one is y equals negative 3x plus 8. And my second line was y equals 1/3 x minus 2. All right. Underneath it says state the slopes of both of the equations. So I know that slope is m. So my m value in the first equation was negative 3 over 1, because we know every number is really over 1. And the slope in my second equation, mx, was just 1 over 3. So I'm going to go ahead and just highlight those as well. So I know that this is the slope from my first equation, and I know this is the slope from my second equation. Underneath it says, well, what do you notice about the slopes? So there's a few things that I could say here. They both have a 3, they both have a 1, they're both fractions. You know, this is a negative and this is a positive. So that's really the only difference here that I'm seeing. And then the 3 over 1 is kind of switching up to be a 1 over 3. So when it's asking you, what do you notice? When a negative becomes a positive, it means I'm negating that slope. So it's called the negative. And then when I'm flipping 3 over 1 to be 1 over 3, those are called reciprocals of each other. So what do you notice about the slopes? They're negative reciprocals of each other. And then it asks you, well, what does that mean about those lines then? Well, it means that those lines are going to be perpendicular. Awesome. All right. If the slopes are equal, I know that the lines are parallel. And if they're negative reciprocals, that means they're perpendicular. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Just kidding. So sorry. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email your teacher. Okay. Underneath, slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines. So what do you know about parallel lines? Those slopes are, you guessed it, equal. Another way we could write that is the same. What do you know about perpendicular lines? Well, we just learned that perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes. All right, moving on to the next page. So if we look at the next part here, it says given the pairs of equations, they want us to determine if those lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So I'm just going to highlight all of those key words here, parallel, perpendicular, or neither, because in order for me to answer that question, I have to look at the slope. Only slope tells me if they're parallel or perpendicular. So again, I know that these are lines. Let me highlight that as well, because I know that lines are in the form y equals mx plus b. So if I have that form, I'm ready to go. And if I'm not, I have to solve so it is y equals mx plus b. So if I look at part A, both of these are the y equal mx plus b, so I'm good to go. The only thing I need to look at is slope. So I'm going to highlight the slope of the first equation and the slope of the second equation. Again, anytime I have a number like 2, I can always put it over 1. So I know the slope of the first equation is positive 2 over 1. The slope of the next is positive 1 over 2. If they're parallel, that means that the slopes are equal. And if they're perpendicular, it means they're negative reciprocals of each other. So as I'm looking here, these numbers 2 over 1 and 1 over 2 are definitely not equal. And they're also not going to be negative reciprocals. They are flipped, 2 over 1 and 1 over 2. So I have the reciprocal part, but I don't have the negative part. A positive would have to become a negative, and it didn't. So it turns out that both of these actually don't work for the first one. So when I answer the question, because then it also says that I have to explain how I know my answer, I know that the answer would be neither. they're not parallel or perpendicular because the slopes have no relationship. I'm only looking at slope to answer this question. So again, because the slopes have no relationship, I know that the answer is nothing. There's nothing going on here. If I look at part B, same thing. I'm going to highlight the slope because that's what I'm going to use to answer the question. Again, I know that any number is over 1, so I'm going to change it so it's -5/1. That would be the slope of the first. And then +1/5 is the slope of the second. Are these guys equal? Absolutely not. This is a negative and this is a positive. So it's not parallel. So let's try perpendicular. Negative, positive. Okay, so the negative part is working. Reciprocal, 5/1, 1/5. They both work, so this would be perpendicular lines. Those slopes show that the lines are perpendicular. How do I know? Because the slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. Please make sure you guys are writing all of this down to fully answer the question. So again, it's because those slopes are negative reciprocals. I know they're perpendicular. All right. Now C and D are a little bit more ugly, and I'm only saying that because they're obviously not in y equals form on either one, which is annoying because now we have to do some work, but that's okay because you guys got this. So again, if you feel like you have to pause the video, please do that. So I'm going to just write both of these guys separate. So I have 5x plus 3y equals 2, and then I have the 9x minus 15y equals 1. All right, and I'm just going to draw like a little squiggle here to separate my work. So if I want y, that means I don't want x. So I'm going to move this positive 5x over, and it's going to become a negative 5x. So instead of me having 5x on the left, I have a negative 5x on the right. I'm just like moving it over here. All right, I won't have enough room to show all of my work for that step, so just go with me on this. Positive becomes a negative when I move it over. And now I have 3y, but I just want y. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide every single term by 3. Because whatever I do to one, I have to do to all. So now I have y equals negative 5/3x, negative 5/3x plus 2/3. This will not simplify, neither will this, so I'm going to leave them alone. All right, moving on to the next equation, same thing. I want y, which means I don't want x. So this positive 9x, I'm going to move it over so it becomes a negative 9x. All right, and this is all from last year. I know some of us still have trouble with solving, even me. It depends on the equation, so just take your time and do one step at a time. This was a negative 15y, so remember you got to bring down that negative with the 15y as well. And now again, I want to get y by itself, so the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide each term by negative 15, because whatever I do to one, I have to do to all. So if you had your graphing calculator with you, this would simplify it on the screen without you having to really do anything. So if you had typed in like -9 divided by -15, it would have told you that it simplifies to be a positive 3/5. All right, and then the same thing here. If you had done 1 divided by -15, it would have just showed you that you just get a negative 1/15 at the end, okay? And then it's asking you again, are the slopes going to be parallel or perpendicular, right? Are those lines going to be parallel or perpendicular? So I'm going to just highlight the slope on both, because that's what I have to look at in order to answer the question. Negative, positive, 5/3, 3/5. I have negative reciprocals, so these lines will be perpendicular. And again, I know they're perpendicular because of the slope, because the slopes are negative reciprocals. The slope is what tells me what the answer will be. All right. And then if we look at part D, it's the same thing. So I'm just going to take a second and solve both of these equations just like I did on C. If you want to take a minute right now to pause the video so that way you can try to solve on your own, I would do that, and then you can always press play after to check your work. So as I go here, I see y is not by itself. I have to get rid of the 8x. So a positive 8x becomes a negative 8x when I move it over. And then the plus 5 just comes down. Divide everything by 2. So we get y equals negative 4x plus 5 over 2. And then the next one, same thing. I want y, so I have to move the x. So a negative 4x becomes a positive 4x when I move it over. And again, it was a positive 9, so I'm just rewriting that. It was a negative y, so I have to bring that down, negative y. And then here, I know that there's a coefficient, even though it's invisible, it's really like an invisible 1. So I have a negative 1 in front, so the opposite of multiplication is division. I'm going to divide negative 1 on each term. So now we get y equals negative 4x minus 9. Just picking up the pace here a little bit. So if I look at the slope on each one, I can see that they're exactly the same, negative 4 and negative 4. So if the slopes are equal, I know that those lines have to be parallel. You got it. So they're parallel because of the slope, because the slopes are equal. It's the only way for you to be able to tell what the answer is going to be. All right, so now we have our answer for A, B, C, and D. All right, so now if we keep moving on, if I look at example 1 underneath, it says given a line that's going through those points, 8, negative 3, and negative 4, negative 12. We want to determine the slope, so I'm just going to highlight that. We have to determine the slope of the line that's going to make them parallel, and we have to find a slope that's going to make them perpendicular. All right. I'm going to just start off by labeling. I know that this is the x coordinate and this is the y. I know that this is the x and this is the y. All right. If you think back to the do now, if I wanted to find slope, I could just do rise over run because I was given a graph. Example 1 has no graph, which is annoying, but we can still get the slope. We're just going to use the slope formula here since there is no graph. All right, so the slope formula is on your reference sheet. It's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And I'm putting an m in front because I know that m represents the slope. So if I want to find the slope of these two lines, these 2 points, I'm really finding the m value. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and plug in. I have my y's on top and my x's on the bottom. I don't want to confuse you because I feel like a lot of teachers do this different, but if you read left to right, I hope all of you do that, I'm just going to plug in left to right. So the first y value, because y goes on top, the first y I'm seeing is negative 3. And then the next y I'm seeing is negative 12. Same thing for x. The first x is 8. The second x is negative 4. And then again, negative 3 minus negative 12 is positive 9. 8 minus negative 4 is positive 12. And I can simplify this to be 3 over 4. Because if you can simplify, we really want you to. So I know that that's going to be the slope of these 2 points. So if I want a line that's going to be parallel to these, I know that the slope would have to be the same. It would have to be equal. So I'm just going to highlight parallel lines. and I know that the slope would have to be equal. If I want perpendicular lines, I know that it wouldn't be equal, it would be the negative reciprocal. So what's equal to 3 over 4? 3 over 4. So I know that my slope for A would be the same. And then what's a negative reciprocal for 3 over 4? Well, a positive becomes a negative. 3 over 4 is going to flip to be 4 over 3. All right, you got it. Those are going to be my answers for A and B. All right, moving on. Next page. So now it says line P contains the points 8, 4 and 4, 3. Line Q contains the points 4, -9 and 2, -1. And then it's asking you, are the lines going to be parallel, perpendicular, or neither? So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of highlight here what's important. Let me bring this down. Sorry guys, didn't realize that was off. So I know that line P contains x, y, which is 8, 4, and again my x, y, which is 4, 3. Line Q, my second line, has the points x, y, which is 4, -9, and x, y, which is 2, -1. And then again, it's asking you if the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. And I know if they're going to be parallel or perpendicular based on the slope. Okay. So I'm just going to organize my work here, and I'm just going to label, here's my work for line P, and then over here, here's going to be my work for line Q. All right. I know that the slope formula is that y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. All right, I forgot if I said this before. This is on your New York State reference sheet, so you don't have to memorize this, okay? It'll be given to you. And then I'm going to go ahead and plug in. So I have my y's on top and my x's on the bottom. Anytime you're plugging in, you always have to use parentheses in order to do that. I don't remember if I said that on the last question, so make sure you use parentheses to plug in. So again, y is on top, so my first y is 4, my second y is 3. X is on the bottom, my first x is 8, my second x is 4. And then when I plug in and solve, 4 minus 3 is 1, 8 minus 4 is 4. So that's going to be my slope of line P. Now I'm going to go ahead and find the slope of line Q. Again, slope is represented by m, so that's why I'm writing m equals. So again, we have y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. Whenever I plug in, I have to use parentheses. And now I'm good to go. The first y is -9. The next is -1. My first x is 4. My second is 2. When I plug in on top, -9 minus -1 is -8. And then 4 minus 2 is 2. And I can simplify this to be 4 over 1, but again, it's going to be that negative 4 over 1. All right. So as I look back, I know that parallel is equal. These slopes are definitely not equal. Perpendicular is negative, reciprocal, positive, negative. 1 over 4, 4 over 1. So they are going to be perpendicular, and I know it's perpendicular because I have negative reciprocal slopes. And again, I'm just going to highlight the word slopes. I can't stress that enough. I don't know if you guys can tell with all the highlighting. You are only determining parallel or perpendicular based on the slope only. All right, example 3, it says 2 lines have the same y-intercept are going to be perpendicular. So I'm going to go ahead here and just highlight that there's going to be two lines in this question. They're both going to have the same y-intercept, and they're going to be perpendicular. So I'm even going to highlight perpendicular because that's going to be important. And then it's asking if the equation of one of these lines is the y equals negative 4 over 5x plus 6. What's the equation of the second? All right. I know that if those lines are perpendicular, it means that the slopes are negative reciprocals. So the first thing I want to look at for the line that they gave me is the slope. So I know if this line has a slope of negative 4 over 5, the slope of my new line is going to be not negative, but positive, and not 4 over 5, but 5 over 4. So this is the slope that I need for my two lines, these guys right here, to be perpendicular. So I know the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b, and I know that the slope of my new line is going to be 5 over 4, and then b is my y-intercept. So if I reread the question, it says they have the same y-intercept. So if this is a plus 6, this will also be a plus 6. Example 4. So it says given a point, negative 3, 6, and a line, y equals 2x minus 8. What's the slope of the line? Well, I know slope is mx plus b, so I know the slope is 2. What's going to be the slope of any line that's parallel? Well, parallel lines have the same slope, so it'll also be 2. And then it's asking me to write an equation of a line that's through this point, and it's going to be parallel to this line. So this is kind of a heavy question. There's a lot going on here. So all I know is that if I want to write the equation of a line, I'm going to even just highlight that. I know the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to start off by at least just writing that. And then I'm going to go ahead and kind of go from there. So I want a line that will be parallel to the original. Parallel lines have the same slope. So I know my m value is 2. I can kind of plug that in here. And if I want my parallel line going through the given point, well, the given point was negative 3, 6. Here's my x, here's my y. So now I know that my y value is 6. And I know that my x value is negative 3 because they're giving it to me. And then again, we have like our plus b. So now I've solved for everything except that b value, so we'll come back to that at the end. So now I'm just going to keep going here. So we got 6 equals negative 6 when I multiply plus b. And if I want to get b by itself, I have to make that negative 6 into a positive 6. So I can move it over. And I know that 6 plus 6 is 12. So I know that 12 equals b. And then I'm going to kind of just break up my work here. So on the left-hand side, all I was able to do was solve for my y-intercept, that b value. So if I want to write an equation that's going to be parallel to this line, I know that when I plug into mx plus b, that m value better be the same for both because m is the slope. And then the b value, well, if I want it going through this point, the b value has to be 12, which is a positive 12. So I plugged in for m, same slope. I solved for b, it was positive 12. So this would be the answer for C. And then part D, it says, what is the slope of any line that's perpendicular to the given line? Well, the given line had a slope of 2, so the given line had an m value of 2, but I know that every number is over 1. I want a perpendicular line. So perpendicular would be negative, so positive becomes negative, reciprocal. So 2 over 1 becomes 1 over 2. So I know that this is the slope that I would want to use for a perpendicular line. And I know that, now I have to explain, I know that because negative reciprocal slopes show perpendicular lines. All right. Okay, last page. So if we look at example 5, okay. It says write an equation of a line that passes through the point 7, 3, and it's going to be parallel to 4x plus 2y equals 10. So this is very similar to example 4. It just has an extra step. They didn't just tell us what the slope is going to be because this is not in y equals mx plus b form, whereas in example 4 it was. So this just has an extra step because I have to solve to make that y equals mx plus b. So I'm just going to rewrite it. 4x plus 2y equals 10. I want to get y by itself. So this positive 4x becomes a negative 4x when I move it over. 10 was positive, so I just have my plus 10 and bringing it down. Now I want to get y by itself. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So when I divide 2 everywhere, now I'm getting a negative 2x plus 5 when I simplify. Okay, so if I want to write an equation of a line that's going to go through this point, but I want it to be parallel, I know that parallel lines means they have the same slope, so I have to look at the slope, which is negative 2. So my first step was finding the slope. My second step is using that slope, which is negative 2. I have to now plug in the 0.73, which is xy. So I know that my y value is 3, and I know that my x value was positive 7. All right. And now from here, I'm just going to solve. So 3 equals negative 14 plus b. Negative 2 times 7 is negative 14. And if I want to get b by itself, I have to move this negative 14. So a negative becomes a positive. I'm going to add 14 to both sides. So now we have b equals 17. That was my second step. And now my third step, if I want a line that's parallel to the original, I know that parallel lines have the same slope. So I'm going to keep the negative 2. And I just solved my new b value is going to be 17. And then I'm done. Because again, I know that parallel lines have the same slope, which they do. And then I just had to plug in this point that they gave me so I could find that new y-intercept. All right, you guys doing a great job. Have a great day. Make sure that you email us. If you have any questions, please take all the notes and don't forget to submit your work. Awesome.